Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you're all on your way to being fully caffeinated and settled in. It's really a treat to be back here at IRI. Welcome to Advancing Democracy, a fireside chat on U.S. global leadership and priorities with the really terrific Assistant Secretary, feels good to say those words, Rand. My name is Jenna Ben-Yehuda. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Atlantic Council, just a few blocks down the road. And on behalf of the Council, I'd really like to extend my just tremendous thanks to Executive Vice President Kimber Shearer, Patrick Quirk, Scott Mastick, and their colleagues, and all of you here at the International Republican Institute for hosting us this morning, and to our audience for joining us. We're confident that today's discussion will provide important insights into the future of U.S. strategy and leadership in the pursuit of democracy across the globe, especially under such trying circumstances. The Atlantic Council's mission is to shape the global future together with partners and allies. And essential to that mission is the Freedom and Prosperity Center that we house at the Council. With its mission of promoting the well-being of the poor and marginalized populations around the world, this center produces key research exploring the interplay between prosperity, democracy, and freedom. And like so many around the world, we believe that the best way to defend freedom and democracy is to share the evidence of its benefits. So the Freedom and Prosperity Center does just that. Its indices that it produces show that democracy and the rule of law are really essential ingredients for true long-term prosperity. And this is an unbiased, really data-driven, fact-based argument against these autocratic models. And much of the center's research focuses on the pursuit of democracy around the world, along with the role that the U.S. and its allies play in promoting the democratic institutions in developing countries that all of us work so hard to safeguard. IRI has been a key collaborator of the center in producing this research, and together our organizations have produced multiple reports and events on democracy and elections and launched State of the Parties, a paper series analyzing multi-party systems in different regions around the world. So this research and the conversation that we'll have here today, of course, is much needed. The 2024 edition of these indices launched this past June and showed a growing and concerning trend. Democracy, as we know, continues to be in decline. Political freedom has plummeted to a 24-year low, driven by a really worldwide curtailment of civil liberties, restrictions on freedom of expression and information, and a decrease in the number of free and fair elections. Data from the indices shows that this decline is not specific to one region, but is truly present throughout the world, including in North America and Western Europe. And in this context, nearly 50% of the world's population has already cast or will cast a ballot in a national election this year, the largest number in history. And so with authoritarian trends on the rise, democracy is still really on the line in many of these cases. This year has already shown us all sides of the spectrum, from peaceful and fair elections in Taiwan and South Africa to an authoritarian leader refusing to release his stranglehold of power in Venezuela. With the U.S. in a critical election year ourselves, it's really more important than ever to promote democracy at home and abroad, and that stay at the heart of American foreign policy. The Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the State Department plays a really crucial role in America's efforts to protect and promote freedom, democracy, and human rights around the globe. So I'm especially delighted to introduce the Bureau's newly and finally confirmed Assistant Secretary, my friend, Dafna Rand. In office since August 8th, Assistant Secretary Rand brings to the Bureau a wealth of experience serving in numerous roles in the State Department, along with the National Security Council. This might be your fifth, sixth time back in the department. So I hear each time getting online gets a little bit easier. And been at the NSC, the Select Committee on Intelligence in the Senate, and the Center for New American Security. She's also an academic, holding a doctorate in political science from Columbia and authoring numerous books on international security and democratic reform in the Middle East and North Africa. And just 1 week ago, she was appointed by the White House to serve on the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, bringing her diplomatic skills and expertise to protect human rights and freedoms across the region at a time of just tremendously increasing importance. So together here, we also have Patrick Quirk, Vice President of Strategy, Innovation, and Impact at IRI. Patrick also serves as a non-resident senior fellow for the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. So lots of points of intersection. Patrick has been instrumental in helping to develop Freedom and Prosperity Center's research and programming on freedom and democracy. And this year alone, he's authored or co-authored 5 reports for the Council, offering a variety of concrete policy initiatives for the U.S. government to promote democracy abroad. He also co-created our State of the Parties paper series and collaborated with the Council on 3 events featuring some of Washington's top democracy experts. Patrick and Assistant Secretary Rand, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to hearing your thoughts and expertise on this critical issue. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Thanks to all of you for being here. And thank you again, Assistant Secretary Rand, for joining us. As Jenna mentioned, after nearly 4 years, it's really wonderful to have a confirmed leader at the helm of this absolutely critical bureau. As you're roughly 2-ish months into the new role, I thought we'd start with asking you to lay out your and therefore the Biden administration's priorities for strengthening democracy overseas. So what are you directing your teams to focus on, and why?
Great. Well, first, I should just say thank you so much for that warm and generous introduction, Jenna. And it is so compelling what you're doing in terms of amassing the evidence of impact, both of democratic norms and process and governance. And that is both contested, obviously, all over the world, but it's also very important in U.S. foreign policy to show beyond the democratic peace theory, which may be, outdated, what are the benefits in terms of the economic benefits, global governance benefits, and international security benefits of a world where democracy is on the rise and democracies are allies and collaborating. So that's just a thank you to you and a thank you to IRI, which is a great partner to DRL. I think it's a many, many decades long partnership here, and we are so honored to be a funder, to be a thought partner of IRI, and really applaud the great work that is happening here. In particular, which is close to my heart, the work that's being done on research. So thank you to Kimber and for Patrick for having the vision to turn to IRI into both a programmatic organization that does work on the ground as well as an organization that does research and evaluations. To your question, so one of my main goals in taking the helm of DRL is to reflect the President Biden and the Biden administration's priorities and to make the case for why we are in this geopolitical contest. So looking back to the national security strategy that President Biden wrote a couple years ago, there was a clear emphasis, and maybe the first time in the modern era, a return to this great power competition. No one is happy about the return to great power competition, but it is a fact that is facing America and our international security. And that is emphasized among other threats and opportunities in the national security strategy. So I commend it to all of you. But my job in DRL is to explain the why. What are we competing about? What is the clash of ideas between us and the PRC, between us and Russia? And fleshing that out for both internally, our strategists, adding flesh to the bones within the government, but then, and more importantly, as a diplomat, explaining that we're not in a competition just to score a point on the board, right? This is not competition for competition's sake. This is not to be a winner. This is because there is a real war of ideas out there in the world, and the ideas are about this clash in the marketplace of ideas, because it's truly a marketplace. There are countries shopping around for which approach to go toward, is about whether it is better to govern through an authoritarianism that is might makes right as its main approach, but also, secures the power, the patronage, and the economic resources in the hands of a few without representing the citizens in the country. And that is one model that we do not believe in the United States government is the right model. It does not align with U.S. democratic values, but more importantly, it does not align with universal global norms on governance that have been repeatedly agreed upon in the UN Charter and in many other international conventions. So this is not just America imposing its ideas on the world. This is a reflection of universal rights and considerations that go back at least to 1945 and the post-World War II order. So we are competing over this vision that we think supports the people in the world, allows citizens to reflect their aspirations and to achieve opportunities, and ultimately allows for greater stability, economic prosperity, and international security. And we believe that fundamentally democratic governance, as Churchill said, might not be ideal, might have a lot of flaws, and might have a lot of hiccups, but has essentially been proven to be better or least bad of all the other options that the world has experienced in the modern times. And so when we compete with the PRC, when we are trying to shore up our examples of why we believe that the United States and our allies, including in the Transatlantic Alliance, it's not because of this hubris. It's not because of American empire. It is about this clash of ideas, and it's being contested every day. And I should say, finally, because I'll stop here, and this is all very theoretical, and I can get into some of how the manifestations of it. I'll say finally, this is not a competition that the United States and our allies asked for. There's a revisionism among the authoritarianism, the autocrats in the world. There is a bandwagoning, in IR theoretical terms, among the authoritarians to impose their system, their ideas, their vision on others. So this is, again, not an imperial democracy promotion. This is standing up for what we believe in the face of revisionism and aggression and an imposition of a PRC, Russia, authoritarian order in other places in the globe that we think is deeply destabilizing.
Great. Thanks for that, Assistant Secretary Rand. So let's unpack those priorities and that broader vision, starting with challenges. So what do you and the Biden administration see as the most potent threats to democracy overseas? And along with that, why does addressing those actually benefit the U.S. taxpayer at home?
There are so many answers here, but let me start with a few examples. I just gave you the big theory, and now we're going to bring it down to real foreign policy, the kind of real foreign policy and practical foreign policy that we at the State Department grapple with. And grapple is the right word because we don't think we have all the answers. And foreign policy is a debate, and we are constantly debating the right approach. We believe that some of the greatest threats come, again, from this revisionist authoritarian model. We believe that, and I'll give you a few examples here. So the PRC has pioneered, and others have followed, a practice of transnational repression. So this idea that not only do they go after dissidents and political oppositionists and civil society and journalists and bloggers within the PRC, but now are emboldened to go after dissidents and Chinese nationals and maybe those who have been exiled or fled or, even academics outside their borders. This is extremely dangerous to the American taxpayer. This means that, the United States is fair game for PRC and others. And again, because there's a modeling and there's a copycat effect here, others, including Russia and other authoritarian systems, are learning here that borders don't mean a sovereign right to security, that you can go after your dissidents with no accountability, essentially, and with no problem in Europe, in the United States, in Latin America. So this is very dangerous. This is a world where security is not confined to the nation state and where threats are transnational in this deeply scary way. That's a very real practical implication for American security. Now, the taxpayers really should care about this, not just for security reasons, but also because Americans want to live in a world where they can trade, do business, go to school, travel all over the world, right? We think about America. America is inherently an internationalist society. We vacillate between isolationism and internationalism over 248 years of our country. And again, since Jefferson's time, we've gone back and forth. So this is not new. But really the vacillation is at the very top. If you go around America, people are proud of their Peace Corps experiences, their missions abroad, their travel abroad, their immigrant roots. We are deeply international in our mindset. And so to have a world where it's not safe for your kids to study abroad, it's not safe for your business to do, business, where the rules of the road and the rules of governance and the rules of economic interdependence are being distorted is essentially not good for Americans' prosperity, for American safety, and for the manifestation and the representation representation of what America stands for. And I can go on and on of other examples, but this transnational repression is something incredibly dangerous and urgent.
So let's dig in a bit more to the various ways in which the CCP is weakening democracy overseas. Research from the Atlantic Council's Freedom and Prosperity Center, as well as IRI, shows that with really bulletproof evidence, the PRC is actively working to undermine political freedoms across the globe, every major region. So you nicely articulated what DRL's view is as to the ways in which the CCP is a threat to democracy. Could you elaborate a bit more as to how does CCP collusion with the Kremlin, which is now also well documented, how does that exacerbate this challenge?
Right. So this bandwagoning, this alliance formation among autocrats that I mentioned is deeply worrisome. And it's manifesting right now in the CCP's alliance of convenience, a transactional relationship between the PRC and the Kremlin. So, for example, the CCP is offering, manufacturing industrial help to Russia that essentially helps the defense sector and the defense industrial base in Russia, which then indirectly or directly helps the war machine. And we and our allies and much of the world have stood up and said it was absolutely unacceptable for Russia to invade Ukraine, a sovereign country, in a gross violation of international norms in February 2022. Again, defending the UN Charter, defending the issues of the ideals of sovereignty, defending the notion, again, of democracy, that Ukraine has a right to govern as its people have expressed and desired. So this cooperation on Russia's war machine and Russia's continuing ability to fight in Ukraine is deeply worrisome. So that's one example. And I want to talk a little bit now about Russia and what Russia's doing, because its model of de-democratization, its promotion of authoritarianism is different in flavor from the CCP. The CCP is maneuvering behind the scenes, is trying to make deals, is very self-interested in many ways in what it's trying to do around the world, and essentially has a huge number of people that it has to keep happy, so that it needs its economic engines to continue to turn. So at the end of the day, the CCP, I don't want to diminish or at all suggest that it's not dangerous, but it's a different model because it's trying to capture and exploit resources and workers around the world. Russia, in the past couple of years, has made the policy decision to actively try to overturn and upset democratically elected governments, and is going after some of the weakest, most fragile ones. And here there's a playbook, which is Russia sees in its near abroad in particular, but also elsewhere in the world, where there's really, again, an internal domestic fight between parties or between different factions of ruling elites, and tries really hard to upset that democratic contestation, right? And that is their mode. And I want to talk a bit about Georgia, because that's really alarming to us in the US government right now, where after 12 years of Georgia Dream rule, we have a very contested election on October 26th. And we see this play out in terms of Russia trying very hard to support this party, essentially copycat what Russia has done domestically, for example, by passing a foreign agents law that limits civil society, limits human rights organization, limits the ability for the expression of alternative ideas to the ruling party, to critique, to suggest new ideas, which, as everyone knows here at IRI, is critical for healthy elections, the ability to debate the issues. And so with these elections starting around January, February, Russia and the Georgia Dream have tried really hard to compress the space for political opposition in so many ways, so much so that we in the State Department responded by using our visa designation mechanisms in DRL to really hold accountable those who had conceived of this idea of the foreign agents law. And I can talk a bit about the levers in DRL besides our foreign assistance that we have to hold those who comply with the Russian model and those who themselves are autocrats within the system accountable for these measures. And so we're deeply worried about these elections because they're only fair, right? They're only fair if there can be a free debate and contestation. And there's no problem if Georgia Dream wins fairly and squarely, but the problem is they've limited the ability for the people of Georgia to express their desire. And meanwhile, back to the point of the connectivity between what happens domestically and what happens in a more theoretical framework for international relations, 80% of the Georgian people are aspiring towards greater EU inclinations. So there's an accession process. And so the people want to be closer to the EU and want to go through the reform process that EU accession involves. And so the limitation on the space and the involvement of Russia through its interference is trying really hard to bring the Georgian government and people back to its orbit. And that's just unacceptable. So I will stop right there talking about Georgia, but I think you all get the point that we're worried and the US government is watching at the very highest levels, as is the US Congress.
So you've really compellingly laid out what the suite of challenges to democracy is overseas and the ways in which the Biden administration is thinking about them. So let's switch a bit to what DRL is and will do to address them. Just as you know, we need to prioritize challenges. We also have finite resources to do something about them. Something you're perhaps, I think, uniquely positioned to understand, given your prior role leading the State Department's Foreign Assistance Office. With this constraint in mind, though, how are you directing your teams to balance supporting civil society with spending resources on, for example, strengthening the core pillars of democracy, for example, political parties, legislatures? And, I ask this given the critique, mild critique that someone raised recently, noting that DRL has skewed funding toward supporting civil society advocacy and away from those core pillars of democracy.
So I'm glad you've asked this question because, again, back to our partnership with you all, with IRI, this lever of change of foreign assistance has been at the heart of DRL's mission set for many decades, sponsored and supported and encouraged by the U.S. Congress through very generous appropriations year on and year out that are bipartisan in nature. The support for DRL is really vast and wide and strong, as I learned during my confirmation process. So foreign assistance in DRL is our significant and probably one of our main levers of promotion of democracy, human rights, civil society, labor standards, etc. So the question you're asking is, how do we go about doing it? And first, I would recommend that everyone read on our website our strategy, because the strategy talks about the different pillars of democratic support, including the procedural part, including party support, which you're talking about, including the complementary support for civil society, and then the support for other institutions, including independent journalists, which is a key part of our work in DRL, our support for transitional justice to enable society to hold accountable themselves, the authoritarians in their past that might have suppressed rights with the theory towards deterring future repression. So our strategy lays out all the different pillars: our support for freedom of expression, our interest in internet governance and freedom online, our interest in technology and human rights, etc. So it's a vast strategy, and it really informs our proposal process, which I think people are familiar with, which is deeply competitive per the rules of the road that are assigned by Congress and enforced by DRL, which has to do with ensuring that we get really good, really cutting edge proposals that really make the case for impact. So in addition to our strategy, which governs how we spend our money, we are always looking for new ideas, and that is the secret sauce to DRL's foreign assistance. We are always taking big bets in our 30 to 40 year history of doing foreign assistance in our bureau on maybe these crazy out of the box ideas, but that have the potential to cultivate an impact in 5, 10, 15 years. And these bets have paid off again and again. So I like to say it's almost the angel investment firm inside State Department Foreign Assistance. We are creative, we are long-term thinkers, and then we stop when we don't see something working. And I think that's a key part of our secret sauce. That's not always the case in foreign assistance. There's a lock-in path dependency to U.S. foreign assistance, which I can say with great familiarity from my previous job. But in DRL, we start new ideas and new theories of change and end ones that aren't working. So we are interested in the evidence of impact. We are interested in what we see working. We are interested in comparative case studies across regions. We are interested within regions, seeing what worked, for example, in Venezuela, and now when we see this authoritarianism in Nicaragua, comparing those two cases. And we do that a lot in our foreign assistance approach. Now, in terms of, so I think I've answered that one, and I would just add that it's not our only lever of change in DRL, and I can talk a little bit, if you like, about the other mechanisms we use.
It's a great segue to my final question before we move to audience Q&A, and that is, and you mentioned this in your opening, how is DRL incorporating evidence on what works and why into its program planning as well as funding decisions?
So maybe I'll start where I left off, which is just enumerating our strategies. So in addition to foreign assistance, which is a very healthy and robust and growing pot of money in DRL, and I should say we collaborate very closely with USAID, which is also growing helpfully. It's DRG and democracy promotion and anti-corruption assistance programs and other bureaus of the State Department, I should add. So we have a collaborative strategy. In addition to foreign assistance, we are growing in the area of sanctions that are directly targeting the actors that are promoting this de-democratization. So here we have Global Magnitsky, which DRL was a brainchild of DRL, actually 10 years ago when I was last in DRL, the idea that the Sergei Magnitsky sanctions, which were just limited to what had happened with this great human rights defender and oppositionist in Russia, could be repeated and iterated on globally. Our embassies really appreciate that sanction tool because it allows us to have a smart sanction that's really just targeting individuals who are the drivers and the entrepreneurs, shall we say, in some of these systems promoting the authoritarianism and the corruption. So we have Global Magnitsky. We have these visa restrictions that are trying to hold accountable and say, look, folks can't just come into the United States and visit Disney World if at home, you know, they are doing terrible things to their people, if they're stealing money, if they're repressing dissidents and civil society. It's the very least we can do to stop them from giving a visa. A discretion of a visa legally is the State Department's purview to give at will. So we're using the visa restrictions, and what we're finding in terms of evidence in learning and analyzing this tool, which is relatively new, it has a effect of the sort of naming and shaming internally, because there's a status to being able to travel abroad, right? So in some of these systems, whether it's Georgia, where we just did our 3C visa policy, Iran, where we've done it very deliberately and carefully to punish essentially and give consequences and accountability to the individuals who were repressed and were active in the pushing back on and really jailing all the leaders of the women's rights movements a few years ago. So we're doing an analysis on this, on the visa restrictions, and we're seeing in the beginning of our evidence collection that it has the effect of being embarrassing. And that's, you know, I don't want to exaggerate, but that's beginning of good evidence of the power of that tool. And now the other tool I want to talk about a little bit is our work with Department of Commerce. Believe it or not, both DHS and Department of Commerce are incredibly good human rights organizations right now in the Biden administration. And DRL is working every day with both departments. So with Commerce, we're working on export controls. We don't believe that the State Department, which has the right to control export controls, that is how U.S. companies are given the rights to export and to sell abroad in various countries. Those export controls and those licenses go through the State Department. And we don't believe that dual-use items that can be used to repress dissidents, journalists, bloggers, independent activists, LGBTQ leaders should be allowed a license. And the Department of Commerce agrees. So we've had a luck in targeting export controls. And I'll give you one example. There's commercial spyware, which is a threat on many levels to national security. And when it's misused by authoritarian regimes, it's used to really get into the phones and the personal computers and to stop the work of civil society and political dissidents. So we've been successful with Commerce of saying no to an exports license request from a commercial spyware company that was trying to do business with an authoritarian regime. And they had no idea, frankly, this company, what their product was being used for. And they were so embarrassed, or not embarrassed, but they were so alarmed about the end use of their product that they created a company policy to only sell and do business in democracy. So that's an example of the impact and effect of our export control work. And then finally, I'll highlight with DHS, we're working on supply chain issues. And this goes back to one of the Biden priorities that I'm really happy in DRL to be able to institutionalize and to add a little flavor to and to really implement very directly, which is the Biden administration has focused a lot in supply chains from competitors such as the PRC, right? And that we know about the CHIPS Act and many other ways in which the Biden administration has created a very smart industrial policy to make sure that American workers and American companies get a fair advantage when the supply chain traces back to the PRC and others, back to this exploitative business practice and economic co-option. So as part of the supply chain issue, we see that some products in the world can be sourced back to slave labor, for example, in Xinjiang province in the PRC, where Uyghur populations that are often detained and held and against their will in really terrible conditions are forced to produce some of these products for these companies that end up in an international supply chain. So with DHS, we're trying to implement the relatively new act that Senator Rubio and a number of other members of Congress passed a couple years ago, which says if there was forced labor by Uyghurs in the supply chain, that product can't be imported into the United States. And that should deter and stop. We're big importers, right? We have a big market of consumers. And the goal here is to send the signal to international business and companies in the industrial sector that we will not allow for this sourcing of labor. And it's been really productive work with DHS because the Customs and Borders agency will work with us to really stop containers and do checking on the supply chain and on the sourcing of the labor. And we are really proud of that work, especially it's a bit of a pilot experiment to try to source it back to the slave labor and stop this terrible, or at least, prevent and try to I don't want to say punish, but enact consequences for this terrible practice of labor conditions in Xinjiang. So that's an example I would give of evidence of impact.
So it's great to hear about that whole of government approach to addressing the multiplicity of threats that we've talked about. Now is the time when you all get to ask the Assistant Secretary your questions. Based on her schedule, we have time for 3. So if you do have a question, please queue behind the microphones here in the room. I would ask that you make the question brief and introduce yourself, name and title. As folks come up to the microphones, I will take one from online, which is, how does the Biden administration balance this push for democracy overseas with strengthening and maintaining relationships with non-democratic but strategically important countries?
So this is the core of DRL's raison d'etre and daily work. And frankly, I mentioned before that foreign policy is actually a big debate. So in the State Department, we're having really fruitful and productive and constructive debates every day, and not just at my level, at every single level in the State Department, and how to approach our partners and how to work on strengthening alliances, strengthening partnerships, working together on global security concerns while attending to our concerns about de-democratization or authoritarianism. So this balance, I hate to use the word balance, but recognizing the interconnectedness, for example, in some of our countries of concern. So I would list off, for example, Egypt is a place where we're very, very concerned about the domestic human rights record that is not necessarily getting any better, although recently Egypt released some prisoners, and there we have a very important security partnership with the government of Egypt. And yet in DRL, we work with our colleagues and our experts in the embassy and in Washington to try to make the case diplomatically. And this is the lever that I didn't mention, that is the core to DRL's mission. Use our diplomatic engagement to make the case to the government of Egypt that essentially this is not good for our partnership. Having such a repressive system in the largest Arab country that is so young in terms of its youth bulge is not a recipe for stability, economic success. So using our diplomatic relationship to really make this case. So in DRL, we try to creatively work with our other colleagues and our embassies and our diplomats and the secretary and the president and other senior officials to make the case that you can do both at once. You can integrate the promotion of democracy and our concerns about human rights, even while you're shoring up partnerships on other issues such as economic interactions and relationships that relate to security concerns or third-party concerns, etc. And I would just note that, Turkey is another one that's standing out as a country that is so critical as a NATO ally. We need to work with Turkey on so many fronts, especially because the neighborhood has gotten really rough in both the Middle East and in Europe. And we're deeply concerned about the limitations on journalists, the arrests of political opposition, etc.
All right, let's come into the room here, please.
Good morning. My name is Priya Saha. I'm from Bangladesh. Now I'm here. So my question about Bangladesh, all of you know that the regime changed. And this time, within 5th August to 15 August, 2,210 Hindu family were attacked. 7 people were murdered. Many temples were burned down. And the atrocity going across the country against the indigenous community in the Chakma, in the hill tract area, and across all over the country. And nobody is being accountable, nobody arrested. And from the government side, they are not talking a strong word. So you cannot do that. So it will be a punishable offense. Rather, they are talking, maybe they were associated with the, other party. That's why they are they're justifying the attacking on religion, minority, and indigenous community. What type of democracy is going on? I cannot understand, because my people dying every day, and my family, maybe they are going to move anywhere else. They cannot survive safely in Bangladesh now. On the other hand, most of the people that are associated with terrorism, like Joshimuddin Rahmani, he was the proven associated with Al Qaeda, and he released. He was accused and was in jail. And on the other hand, those people were or named the Tajul Islam. He was the attorney and the sole attorney of war criminal. In Bangladesh, there is a tribunal, war criminal tribunal. As this tribunal, he was the attorney of war criminal. Now he became the chief prosecutor of this tribunal. So you understand what type of democracy this is going on. So my question is, here in America, is a great country, and you are working and helping across the world for the democracy and surviving the minority and all other people with safety, security. And I hope and request, please save the Hindu community and indigenous people live safely, securely in Bangladesh. At the same time, the arrest all these terrorists and jihadists, those are attacking every day in the non-Muslim family. They're vandalizing every day. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that question. And I'm so glad that I have a chance to talk about Bangladesh, because I'm very, on one hand, as you say, excited about the opportunities for a democratic transition, and also worried and concerned because I know from my own experience working on the Middle East, the Arab Spring, and other transitions, that this period right after a dictator flees and falls can be really fragile and really difficult, especially on protecting minority rights and transitional justice, which are the 2 issues that you mentioned, and which every day my bureau and other bureaus of the State Department are working on, because we know how critical it is to show that democracy delivers, that a new leadership can protect security, can ensure inclusivity, and can hold accountable those who have committed terrible crimes against their people. So on transitional justice, we are making a significant effort. We are working with the UN, with Volker Turk, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we just met with him at the United Nations. I just met with him to talk about Bangladesh and his efforts to go out there and to lead an international team to focus on transitional justice, to hold, as you say, accountable those who are responsible for these great crimes. Now, Mohammed Yunus has agreed to come back and lead this transition. That is an incredible mark of public service, because again, he had been in exile, a Nobel laureate who had been in exile, and he is coming back, and he has a very, very hard job to lead in this transition environment when people want to see, again, that democracy delivers. So we are thinking in the US government how to help him, again, deliver on accountability, deliver on protection of minorities, deliver on security to make sure there's no jihadi threat, because again, as you say, that could very much scare people but also make the case that democracy is bad for security, which we don't want. So we're trying to help Mohammed Yunus, and actually the secretary and I just met with him 2 weeks ago at the UN, and he's working very, very hard. So one thing he's trying to do, which is top of his mind, is to work on jobs, because he understands correctly that the students in the streets who were part of this movement in late July and August were really expressing their frustration of the lack of opportunity economically. He's also trying to send a signal internationally that Bangladesh is open for business, which is very hard because there has been this moment of instability. So that's two of the things he's doing, and we're trying to help him. We're also trying to work on the labor conditions, which have long been a concern of ours in Bangladesh for decades, actually. And again, back to sourcing, many, many American products are sourced through manufacturing in Bangladesh. So we're working very, very quickly to make sure there's an agreement between the unions, which are very strong, but have not been traditionally enabled or supported as civil society organizations, and the business leaders. So those are some of the things we are doing. And of course, through all of this, we are promoting and pushing a rule of law approach, which has been lacking in Bangladesh, a rule of law approach to protecting minorities, a rule of law approach to cracking down on jihadism and any kind of terrorist threat to the people of Bangladesh, a rule of law approach, I should mention, to the protection of the Rohingya who have fled from Burma into Bangladesh over the past years, and who have a right through international standards to be protected. And the people of Bangladesh have been incredibly generous. So we are working with the new government to make sure that that continues. And these are some of the things we're doing. But above all else, we are working with Mr. Yunus to make it clear that it is very tricky to take over an interim transition, and he has to balance speed in delivering with getting himself out of office and calling for elections and creating a roadmap for the people for what comes next. So I'm so glad you asked about this, and please be assured that at the very most senior levels of our government, we understand the opportunity, we understand the challenges, and we are really committed to this.
Yeah, so critical to help democracy actually deliver, in addition to combating the many threats we've been talking about. Sure, yeah, sir, come to the microphone, please, and you'll round us out with the third and final question, then we'll close out.
I am the Eitas Berunas, Lithuanian diplomat, but currently at SIPA, visiting fellow. So you didn't mention the country which is from Lithuania and very much of our concern, Belarus. So what is your assessment of what we should do more to support democracy in this country? And again, using this opportunity to thank you, IRA, for very actively supporting democracy, not least from the offices in Vilnius. And there is other question, probably even more difficult. We hope Ukraine will win a war against Russia, and there will be changes, including in Russia. So do you think, and this is a very strategic question, do you think we can do now to support democracy in Russia? Because hopefully we will win against Putin and there will be changes, but there will be people of Russia. So any chance now to support democracy? I know very difficult, opposition leaders are expelled or imprisoned, and there's very little opposition to Putin. So any chance to using very smart technological, social media to support democracy in Russia for the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are two great questions. So let me see if I can answer them in order. So on Belarus, first of all, I want to thank the Lithuanian people and the government of Lithuania, because Vilnius has become the center for the Belarusian opposition, with great, I think, efforts by everyone in Lithuania to understand the need to protect these individuals, many of whom are, again, deeply endangered because of the transnational repression that I described before. So, for example, 2 weeks ago when I was in New York, some of the Belarusian opposition was there, and you should have seen the bodyguards that have to surround these individuals. It's quite sad. They're really scared when they leave their homes. So thank you to the Lithuanian people for supporting the Belarusian opposition. And, one thing I learned when I talked to them a few weeks ago was, I asked, where is the learning coming from? From Moscow to Minsk, or from Minsk to Moscow? And they said to me, Lukashenko is teaching the Kremlin how to do the tricks in terms of authoritarianism, repression, surveillance, and marginalization of anyone who would express a differing view. And that was deeply concerning. And we are working on prisoner releases, for example, and other means. We have held accountable the individuals in the Belarusian government through our designations of global Magnitsky sanctions and our visa sanctions. So we are focused on it. And I would also here bring in the US Congress, which has been focused on it, and commend Senator Cardin and many, many members of the Senate and Congress in a bipartisan fashion who've been focusing on the Belarusian problem. Now, on the second question, I think this is a strategic, big picture question of how do we, first of all, the US and the West is supportive of the Russian people. This is not a concern with the people of Russia. And then what we need to repeat that again and again. This is not a war with the Russian people. This is not an attack on the Russian national identity. This is essentially an effort in Ukraine to protect the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian government and people, and its literally right to exist as an independent country. And I think we need to make that clear. And this question of where is public opinion in Russia and supporting the war machine and the imperialism, this is a very important question. And I think in the long term, we need to help the Russian people and body politique detach their nationalism from this concept of imperialism in the near abroad, because the two have been intertwined, unfortunately, in dangerous ways. And this goes back to Georgia and Moldova and the near abroad states where there's been intervention because of this concept of Russian nationalism and its views. And again, I do believe that many, many Russian people want to live normal lives, and the preponderance of people want interconnectivity with the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is why we need alliances. We need alliances with Lithuania. We need alliances with NATO partners in the EU. We need alliances all over the world to help push back on this nationalist, imperialist, pro-authoritarianism that we're seeing. And this is part of our strategy, and we are trying to enlist partners all over the world. And essentially, we need to help Ukraine defend itself because it's a litmus test of our resolve in this regard.
Well, to wrap us up for today, first and foremost, wanted to thank Assistant Secretary Rand for being here. We truly appreciate you taking the time. Thanks very much to your team for all the prep that went into the session today. Thanks to our partners at the Atlantic Council for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us here in person and online. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.